Okay, so we'll get started. My name is Peter Young. I'm a Yale class of 1974, Brantford, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to our Yale Career Fireside Chats on the art of networking. Just by way of background, this is a new series that was started last year, which was designed to cover what one might consider important career issues that one has to deal with. Many of you are familiar with the Yale career panels that started over 5 years ago, for which we've done 25 thus far. They cover legal, medical, architecture, drama and film, and so forth. We've done about 4 each year. Last year we started the Career Fireside Chats. We had one on managing major career changes, and then we had one on serving on boards, which was very, very popular. So today's Fireside Chat will be on the art of networking, which I think is important not only in your professional career, but just in your other activities in life, whether it's a nonprofit or otherwise. Clearly, there's no question that networking is a critical tool for success across a variety of activities here in your life. I'm very, very pleased to have 2 people, both Yale graduates, and who have had very successful careers, not only in their professional careers, but also outside of work, and can really comment from their experiences on how networking made a difference, mistakes that they might have made, but also sort of some pointers on how, looking at it from your perspective, how you might choose what kind of networking tools and what kind of activities might make sense and might be helpful. To my left, I have Ken Inadomi. He is the co-chair of the Yale Alumni Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion, as well as the founding chair of YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Allegiance. But he's had a career that has spanned both industry, but also nonprofits, and he'll comment on that. To my right and your left is Alice Young, and she has had a very distinguished career in the law, and for most of it running the Asia practices of prominent firms. But also, she's also, like Ken, has had a lot of personal experience doing nonprofit and other work. So she too will talk about her career and how networking has intersected with that career. Just before we get started, I want to just talk about upcoming events. On November 15th, we are going to have the 26th Yale Career Panel on the legal profession, and you can register for that. And it's going to be from 4:30 to 5:30 on November 15th. Last comment is after the first 3 of these career panels, we started recording them. And so those of you who be curious what was said at a career panel or a fireside chat on career issues that was completed, but you didn't have a chance to see it, you can go to yalecareerpanels.com, and there is a button where you can access the recordings of all except the first 3 career panels and fireside chats. And this one, by the way, is being recorded and will be available in a few days on that website. If you get so excited and you want to watch it again, or if you have a friend who couldn't make it and would like to watch. So with that, what I'd like to do is ask each of our 2 sort of panelists really to just sort of reflect on their career, but in particularly the intersection of networking in their careers that might be relevant to you. So Ken, do you want to get started?
Sure. Peter, thank you. And Peter, also congratulations for being the mastermind behind this career panel series. I think it's been just an incredible gift to the alumni and to students, so thank you.
And you survived one of them, right? You survived the one on nonprofits, right?
Barely.
Yeah, barely, right.
So let me talk about how networking helped my transition from the private sector to the nonprofit sector, because I think it illustrates a lot of the value and the power of networking. I really had no contacts in the nonprofit sector when I sought a job with a housing agency. There was a random internet posting that came my way. I applied for it. It turns out I was the only one from the private sector that applied to the search firm that was seeking an executive director for this agency called the New York Mortgage Coalition. From what I understand later, my resume went into the reject pile. But what happened, and of course I didn't know, so I'm doing this retrospectively. But what happened was the day after I submitted the resume, I called the person on the search firm that was the contact on the bottom of the email. And I said, may I have a few minutes with you? A few minutes ended up being about 20 to 30 minutes. And I had a lot of questions. And through that series of questions, through the give and take, through her belief that I was truly sincere, that I wasn't just a for-profit opportunist seeking to cross the line into nonprofit, she actually gave me an interview. That interview was parlayed into an actual offer. But so that's just one example of reaching out, maybe doing something a little non-conventional, following up your resume with an actual phone call, and it turning out to be to having a big payoff.
Well, you were from finance, right?
Right.
Originally?
Well, I had a background at that time, had a background in mortgage credit, mortgage finance, and really had nothing to do with housing per se. The only linkage was that it was the agency was providing affordable mortgages to low and moderate income families.
Of course, if you're from finance, you were from the dark side, so that made it even more difficult to convince somebody to take you, right?
Maybe even more suspicious, right?
Even more suspicious,
Yeah.
right? Alice, do you want to comment?
Sure. Well, I guess I was a lowly associate in a law firm. I've been practicing for about 6 years. I had spent time in Asia as well as in the United States, and had been approached to become a partner, which in those days was kind of very early on as a 6-year associate, with a law firm that was losing its partner in California and wanted to find someone who had a lot of Asia background. And in those days, there weren't that many people who had that kind of a background. So I went out to interview, and I thought it might be something I'd really want to do, but it was based in California, and all of my contacts, my client work and my family were all on the East Coast. So I thought, have you ever considered opening an office in New York? And this is, well, none of our partners really want to move to New York. And we really couldn't find a good merger partner. So they said, well, why don't you just do a business plan? Let us think about it, make a proposal. So that was a very scary thing to think about doing. But I thought, all right, so what do I have to lose? So I wrote up a business plan that night at the hotel. I came back to the office the next morning, presented it, and lo and behold, they decided to open an office with me as the managing partner. And I had no real skill set. It was a little bit of chutzpah, but actually it was just an idea that I've been thinking about. So where does the networking come in? The networking was that suddenly I was the head of an office of one lawyer in a very competitive market in New York. And I had clients that I had worked with in my firm, in my previous firm, but no real clients as such. So I had to, it wasn't a matter of choice or spending time thinking about it. I had to go out and get clients. And so I ended up spending probably 4 out of 5 days a week going to receptions, going to dinners, meeting people, shaking hands, talking about the law firm, and really forcing myself to broaden my scope of who I dealt with. And I was very fortunate in the sense that by meeting a lot of people and touching base and talking about what the firm that California could do in New York. And because I had established a reputation, which is important, over the 6 years, I had established a reputation as someone who is very knowledgeable in the Asia arena. I was gradually able to expand the network, but it was a very daunting, kind of scary proposition at the beginning. And it was much worse in those days because as a young woman and as an Asian, I started out by going to these events wearing, a proper black business suit, and realized that because 99% of the people at these receptions were men, that they assumed I was the wait staff. And so
did you do a good
after
job?
that,
Did you do a good
they
job?
would hand me their drinks and ask for refreshment. So I realized that I had to differentiate myself a little bit. So I started wearing red, something that made it clear that I wasn't the wait staff, and then would start talking to people, suggesting some ideas and building the network that way. Fortunately, I had always cared deeply about not-for-profits and the kinds of issues of minorities, of those who had less, and had spent a lot of time with a number of different not-for-profit organizations, including the Asia Foundation and the Aspen Institute. And by that point, even as a 6-year associate, I had actually developed a number of wonderful contacts in the not-for-profit area. So my life was always not bifurcated, really just infiltrated back and forth with both the for-profit and the not-for-profit arena. And I think that really helped tremendously. For example, I joined the business committee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I love art. And I just thought it was a wonderful opportunity to see what museums do. And obviously there was a little bit of a fundraising element to it. So I learned a little bit about that. And my first really big project as a new partner in my new firm was as a result of one of the women who was on the committee was doing a big project. She was an EVP at a major company, and she was doing a deal in China. So she introduced me to her GC. So again, there's this interchange back and forth of my personal, professional, business, and not-for-profit life. And so that's kind of how it worked for me as a network.
It's interesting listening to it. One of the issues is how to figure out where to network, right? And I'll give you an example. So if you're a lawyer in a local community, right, then it makes sense, and you're doing just general personal and business, it makes sense that it would be really important to be involved with the community, right? And whether it's politics or the local Better Business Bureau or Rotary Club or whatever. Others, it might be totally different, that'd be like a total waste of time, right? If you're in a profession where you get the business is really more among people of a particular, like CFOs, right? Well, you're not, if you live in Greenwich, you're not going to get a lot of business from CFOs of companies. If you go to the local Rotary Club, right, it's going to be the people at companies and so forth that may be outside of your community. Right. So I think, but how do you figure that? Now, the two of you figured out ways to use your time and network and so forth in ways that ended up helping you. Sure. But like for you, was it different when you were in business versus if you went into nonprofit, for example, right?
Yeah. So Peter, let me even approach that with something that just happened 2 weeks ago. I was taking the subway at 96th Street. People were coming. I was trying to go down. People were coming up. They were saying, "Hey, the subways are broken. All the Ubers are taken. All the yellow cabs were taken." I tried to get something on West End Avenue. That was all taken. I see a young woman entering a cab. And before she closed the door, I said, "Hey, are you going to Midtown?" She says, "Yeah." I says, "Do you mind if I have a ride?" She said, "Sure." We start chatting. It turns out that she is in Yale Brewer's office. Yale Brewer is the Manhattan Borough president. She's someone that we've been trying to meet for our nonprofit. The young woman was delightful. We had a chat and we ended up exchanging contact information. again, totally random and almost by chance, but you never know when a huge opportunity can present itself. But I agree with you that, there are the classic trade associations that you have to join if they're relevant to your profession or to your interests. I mean, that's a given. But always be open to those random encounters that you never know how they're gonna pay
Well,
out.
but the lesson there is you could have, for example, ridden at the cab and not said anything. Or talked about, it's so
difficult in a small space.
No, to be honest with you, if you're just sharing
Especially
a cab.
since he's
So
grateful.
what I'm saying that
I paid for the cab.
part of it, part of this is not necessarily just whether you're in the same space as someone.
Right.
It's what you do, or how
Exactly.
or whether you
Right.
sense that
Exactly.
there's something that's a connection between the two. Right.
Yes. Yes.
So
Right.
this is what I tell all my mentees. You have to work really, really hard to be lucky. And what I mean by that is you have to have the open mind, when you get in the cab, be very nice, chit chat, ask what the person does, whatever, not just sit there like a stone. So you're making the opportunity and it could be that it's just a nice cab ride and you got downtown. But those are the kinds of situations which are everyday possibilities. So yes, you can go to the industry-related business meetings, you can attend lectures by specialists, you can give speeches, you can write articles, you can meet with journalists to sort of tell them about the kinds of things you're doing or thinking about, you can join prestigious organizations, frankly, the Council on Foreign Relations, Aspen Institute. They were very helpful to me as I was developing my career. It was a place where I could meet people where they saw what I was doing. It was substance, not just a casual cocktail conversation. I think those things are the kinds of ways in which you get lucky, get the opportunity. But you have to spend time on it. How much time you spend, I think it's an individual choice. And what things you do, which things you're better at, is really an individual. You have to know yourself. There are some things that can be learned. I force my mentees who are a little bit shy I say, all right, we're going to a cocktail party, get 3 name cards, and not just get the name cards, you have to find out what things they're really interested in, something about their family, something about their work, and then you have to follow up with them. You can't just take the name card, put it in the drawer, and a year or 2 later say, oh, gee, I met somebody who was kind of in this area, maybe I'll send him a note. No, 2 weeks later, if you see an article, you see something that might be of interest, you send a little note, hey, it was great meeting you, I thought you'd be interested in this, and you build relationships. And you never know which one of those, that's the getting lucky in a way. You don't know which ones are going to turn into something and which ones are just going to be wonderful friends, which is fine. Nothing has to really turn into a business prospect. But I found that over the years, I've built we used to call them Rolodexes, now we call them address books. Of
no one knows what a Rolodex is. No one knows what a Rolodex is anymore.
I'm revealing my age. But but I put in the people that I've met and a little bit of something about them personally so it jogs my memory. And frankly, 10, 15 years later, when something comes up that I remember that they were kind of interested in that, or I do a little bit of a database search, people have been extraordinarily helpful to me and will remember if I give them a little nudge about how I met them. And I try to be really, really helpful to people also when there isn't necessarily a payback on it. And I found that
because you never know.
You never know. And I find that over the course.
And if you insist everything has to be an immediate, quid pro quo, you're really going to limit the number of opportunities.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And it happens, sometimes just so totally unexpectedly in a cab, but clearly can seize the opportunity. The minute the light bulb went on that she was with that organization.
He was stalking her for weeks. The real truth, he was stalking for weeks, right?
But that's what I mean about, really working hard to make your luck. That, Ken had everything lined up in terms of what he was thinking about, and this was just a lucky opportunity that he took advantage of.
But you can do your homework. For example, I was asked whether I wanted to be a particular board, and you can think about the mission of that. But part of it is you might want to take a look at, see who's on the board, right? And look at their backgrounds and so forth. And depending upon your reason for being on boards and not boards, that homework would help you decide whether it makes sense or not for you, or when you're on the board, right, who you really want to get to know. The other is that there has to be, I think, people are smart. If it's not genuine, they're going to figure it out, right? Or if you don't have the ability to see the world from the point of view of the other person. Literally, this is a real example. 2 weeks ago, someone who was a graduate student at Columbia in engineering called and said, my investment bank that I run does chemicals and life sciences, and he was in chemical engineering. And he said, could I call and send an email and said, can I talk to you for 20 minutes for career advice? His first question was, I'm thinking about finance. He says, tell me how you spend your day. And I just said, I'm running an investment bank. I've been in it for 30 years. How is it relevant that someone's thinking of an entry job, right? Is it relevant to that? So I just pointed him, I said, I know you have good intentions and someone told you that was the right question to ask, but think of it from my point of view, how that comes across, right? Right. And we had a reset and we ended up with a wonderful conversation, but he had the right idea of trying to talk to someone who was in the industry that's connected in the chemical industry, but the execution was poor, right? And it didn't come across genuinely, right? And I'm sure that's true. You guys are also subject to people networking where you're the target, right?
So Peter, just on that, and you mentioned doing your homework, being prepared. I think one of the key things when you're asking someone, when you're the person seeking the information, when you're the advisee and you're seeking an advisor, make sure you do your homework so that you don't put someone in the position of, tell me about yourself. You should have done a web scan. You should have done the homework on someone's LinkedIn profile. You should have spent quite a bit of time seeing what the person has written, if there's any YouTube on him or her, what they've actually done, so that when you're there, you're not at 1.0, you're already at 2.0, and you can then get into real substance. Because two things happen then. One is the person that you're seeking help from, he realized that he's with someone who's prepared. That immediately shows a degree of credibility on your part. But the second thing is you're going to have a more productive conversation if you're just starting at a higher level. So really, I can't emphasize enough, do your homework.
I'd like to switch to the second question, which is really to talk about different methods. We're sort of getting into that anyway. What are the different methods of networking, right? And the ones that are effective or not effective. And I'll start it by just giving one example of one there's a myth about a particular method that's effective, which turns out is not. Many people think that, well, if I get to know headhunters, that I will get the board seats, right? And it turns out if you do that, it doesn't work really well. Why? Because their job is not actually to help you in your career. Their job, they get hired by boards to find boards, and they have large databases of people and so forth, and colleagues that they consult to try to find the person for that, and where they may have a particular kind of person they're looking for or whatever it is. So you could do that, but the probability that then that headhunter is going to say, oh, you're a perfect fit for an assignment that I happen to have, or a year later that is very, very low. You do better if you actually knew people who are on boards. But if you ask a lot of people say, oh, gee, I want to get to know all these headhunters, right? But there's an example of a method of networking that actually doesn't work very well, right? But maybe if you could talk about different networking, so we say techniques, and which ones are effective or not effective, but also which ones are effective or not effective for certain objectives, right? Ken?
Well, so just to play off that, I think one of the most important ways to network is, let's say you're at a conference and there's a Q&A after either a keynote or a panel. Always raise your hand and ask a question. I think that's one of the most effective ways, because basically it's your stage then when it's your question, and it's got to be a good question. I mean, that's understood. But if you do that and the audience, realizes that you are a thoughtful, person with asking a provocative question that really furthers the conversation. What happens is that after the event is over, people will come up to you. You'll have then a point of engagement, whether it's at the break or the following lunch or the dinner that night. It really gives you kind of a gateway that you can build on. So that's always key. And always try to, in my opinion, always try to be one of the first people to ask the question. If you wait, a lot of times they cut the Q&A and you'll never get the stage.
And always
Right.
tell people who you are.
Right.
I mean, the number of people, they ask a question, never say, I'm so-and-so from whatever. And then, if you don't tell people, they won't know who you are, right?
And that's actually how I got on my public company board. So,
Really?
Ken, it's a perfect
Go ahead.
example.
You asked a good question?
Yeah. Well, as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, is a very young and early member now, many, many years later, but I would ask questions not to get attention to me, but because I was curious. But you never want to ask just before the lunch because people are, trying to get out or before the break. But as it turns out, I had on a number of the council meetings had asked questions. People came up to me afterwards remarking on how interesting my question was and whatnot. And it turns out one of those people happened to be the general counsel of Blackstone. He had was looking for someone for the board who perhaps had some international, and maybe preferably Asia, and saw me at a number of these meetings and called me up. He also noticed that I was on the board of a Japanese bank. Now, again, this is the be prepared to be lucky. I had been the lawyer for a Japanese bank for several years, and they invited me as the first American woman, minority really, to be on their board. I was their lawyer. So I had been on that board. So he thought, well, she's had some board experience already. And I had actually been selected by the Direct Women Institute to learn about being on boards. It was they choose 20 women lawyers a year. And so that combination of factors, but then asking those questions, he kind of thought, well, she's articulate. She seems to fit the criteria. She's been on a board, so it might mean even though she's a partner in a law firm, she might be able to join a public company board. And so that's actually how I was approached for that. So it didn't just come out of the blue, but it was definitely not headhunter. It was definitely all these things prepared me for it, but didn't actually give me the opportunity as such. So I think headhunters certainly have a place. They are the ones that once someone comes up with your name, they may vet on that. And sometimes if you're very, very lucky, they will happen to have honed in on you. But I think the majority of the time, if you're interested in being on a public company board, it really is meeting other people, getting to know people who are already on those boards, really having the background and the gravitas and their sense that you can get along with people also, because that's very, very important on a public company.
Now, there's something wrong with this conversation. And the reason why there's something wrong with it is we're spending way too much time talking about how to get on boards. And the reality is that's not the main reason for people to talk about networking. It's succeeding within their own companies. So I want to switch the emphasis a little bit. Each of you had long careers at different organizations. And I want to switch it to what kind of networking and what kind of relations you develop that cause you to rise and succeed within the organization, or get another job at a job at another place, as opposed to because I think we're talking too much about getting on boards. Ken,
topic of another fireside chat.
Right. So Peter, for me, I think the key thing is I always try to stay what I call mission driven. It's always about mission and not ego. And when people realize that about you, the whole complexion changes. A lot of New York is ego-driven. A lot of New York is narcissistic. It's about them. It's about, their, what's in it for them. And that gets to be so exhausting. It's fatiguing. And when another person like that comes, you can smell it a mile away. So I think it's key that, you really try to keep in mind that it's about us. It's not about I. And if you focus on that, I think people realize that, okay, here's someone that I really want to help. One of my favorite sayings is that change happens at the rate of trust. And when people realize that you're trustworthy, that you come through, that you're on time, that it is about mission and it's about, winning as a team, again, it changes. And I think people are more willing to go out of their way to help. Conversely, if you're that person that is getting help, you have to make sure that you come through. So let's say there's an advisee that comes to me. The trust is established. I make an introduction, or whether it's an e-introduction, or I introduce that person to someone in my network. You want to make sure that they follow through, that subsequent introduction is that they keep their word regarding what they can contribute. So, it really is, it can really go as far as you can keep the commitment. And I think that's really a key thing. And then the other thing is that in any relationship, whether you're the advisor or the advisee, you have the chance for reciprocity. So even if you're meeting a VIP or a CEO and you think that it's totally him or her that can help you, there are a lot of ways to stabilize or to balance that dynamic. You can help, you can serve on a committee, you can volunteer for something. Maybe you can help on an event that person is hosting. Maybe you can help with the logistics of that event. Maybe you can help edit a draft, or you can help with some volunteer effort. There are a lot of, or maybe you can help that person's son or daughter. That's always a key thing. There are always ways in which you can equal the power dynamic between when you're seeking help and when you're giving help. And for the people that are able to hone in on that and to recognize that, it's huge. Okay.
By the way, I forgot to mention, we will have time at the end for Q&A.
Good.
And there are two ways that you can ask questions. One is that there's a chat function you'll see on your screen where you can type in a question. And then I also see someone has used the Q&A function as well. But as we get towards the last 10, 15 minutes, we'll stop and start to take questions from the audience. By the way, I also want to comment along the same lines, which is that I think a big part of the equation is that in your career, unless you do a startup and so you set the whole culture of the company yourself along with your co-founders, you have to make sure you do your homework about what it's like in those companies in terms of how people succeed and what their personality is like. I've had a long career in investment banking, and for example, I was at Salomon Brothers, but I also was at Lehman Brothers. Totally different personalities, totally different styles. And if you said, how do you succeed at Salomon Brothers versus Lehman Brothers, it's really quite different. And the game as far as who you had to know and what kind of skills you had and who you had to network was quite different. At Salomon Brothers, it was all about who had the most revenue. You could have purple hair, and do all sorts of nasty things and be rude to everyone. And they just really didn't care, right? If you had the most revenues, you were going to succeed no matter what. Lehman, it was more of a balance, right? Sure, revenues were important, but a lot of it had to do with whether you played well in the sandbox, who you knew, what kind of skills, and whether you fit in. So I think, and so what kind of networking you did at Salomon was quite different from the kind of networking and to be successful, right? Which presumably is the goal, was really, really different. So you had to use a different method but also you got to say, is that a place I should be, right? If your style is more genteel and so forth, you don't want to be at a Salomon Brothers or Bear Stearns or so forth like that. Of course, I'm talking about firms that don't exist anymore, which tells you how long I've been around. But for those of you who remember, right, that was the case. Whereas if you were If that's your style and you're rough and tumble and you just say, I'm good at getting business, Solomon Brothers might be the perfect place. But you got to start out with that. Alice?
But I think that there's certain things that you can learn to do, even if it's not really quite in your comfort zone. And there's certain things that are really who you are. And so you need to understand that too. So for example, I was, when I started out, really kind of shy. And I liked people, but I hated big crowds. I liked being in intimate groups. I just found it hard to, I didn't love public speaking, but I found that in order to have a platform, you really had to ask that question at the Council on Foreign Relations. You had to speak up. You had to give speeches. You had to make presentations and be very confident in it. So I learned, I practiced, and that was not something that came naturally to me. On the other hand, in a very toxic culture, a corporate culture, I just don't have the ability. I don't have the killer instinct. I don't want to kill anybody. I don't want to be killed. I would be a disaster in, say, a Solomon Brothers. So you have to know enough about yourself to know where you're not going to succeed. And then you also have to make certain kinds of adjustments so that you grow and develop and learn. So I think both of those are important things to do. And the best way to figure that out is, talk to your friends, talk to your mentors, get a sense from them also of what affect you're putting out there. What kind of perception do they have of you? Because it may be different from what you're thinking you are giving out as an affect. So, and that's something you can develop and improve and learn and benefit from. So I would say it's partly to know thyself, and don't really go out for things that are just way out of your comfort zone, but at the same time, be open to really learning. Look at different models of how people have succeeded and figure out which one fits more your personality, rather than a one-size-fits-all. And I found that, as a young associate, I saw all different kinds of styles of client relationship, partnering, working with associates and staff, and then developed my own style. And a key element to that is listening to people, and not just getting ready to give your spiel, because there's so much you learn about that other person if you listen. And also you can then adjust what you're saying so that it fits a little bit better with what they're thinking. And that's a real talent that you can learn.
Now, by the way, Ken and I have known Alice for a long time, so the concept that she was ever shy is hard to believe. But I trust you that you're not lying.
Well, yeah, and just to build on what Alice was saying, that notion of listening, I have a saying that, always let the other person be the smartest person in the room, right? And that's a question of listening. That's a matter of asking questions and really finding out what that person's about. If they go away thinking you're the smartest person in the room, then you're probably not going to get what you want. Okay, you have to kind of change that dynamic. And then the other thing is the whole notion of, I don't think you can listen. So many people are so prepared to say what they want to say that listening just takes a back seat. But the other thing is, when it is your turn to speak, you have to be clear and you have to be succinct. One of the big turnoffs for me is when someone's asking advice and they're just long-winded, whether it's verbally or in an email. I received an email the other day after an e-intro, so that e-intro is fine. Then the person reached out to me, sent me almost a page-and-a-half letter. You can't do that. It's too much. I don't know you yet. Send something quick. Maybe invite for a phone call. Invite me for a phone call, or maybe a coffee or whatever. But keep that introductory reach out short, so I get it. We can connect, and then you build from there. So you have to modulate how much information you're giving and when you give it.
By the way, one of your comments I totally agree with, and we say this at the beginning, very career panel, which is know yourself first. It doesn't, you could have, no matter how good your information is about legal career or about networking or whatever, if you don't start out knowing yourself, you just won't know where the match is going to be, or what, or whether it's really, you got a perfect information about the legal career, but if you don't know yourself, you won't know whether you really fit or not, right? So it's the same thing, right? Which is what you're saying, right? I think that is absolutely correct. So that gets to our third question. It's like a perfect segue, which is, if you think about, the people and the people who are in the audience here, how do you help them understand which networking techniques or which networking styles to choose from to match them, right? Because, as you said, people are different, right? And what your objective might be different. So how do you do that? What advice would you give to the people in the audience about, figuring out which tools make the most sense? Like a carpenter, right? Hammer isn't the right thing. Maybe it's a saw or something else.
So I've got Peter, I've got kind of a short checklist of kind of do's and don'ts. And let me just kind of share some of them. First, make sure that if it's an in-person meeting, make sure you're on time. In fact, make sure you're there early. You don't want to be the biggest insult, or the biggest kind of drawback you can ever establish is to have that first impression be negative, right? That you only have that one time to make the first impression. Second, what really impresses me is that when someone is seeking my help, they take notes, right? No one's memory is good enough that you can, retain everything from a half hour or an hour meeting just by listening. And I also prefer someone taking notes with a pen and paper rather than their iPhone, because it just, I just sense the attention.
You really had somebody take notes on an iPhone?
Maybe it's old school, but
you don't, Ken, you really know this. They were emailing someone else. They weren't taking notes about it. They were Instagramming the meeting. Exactly. You clearly misunderstood.
So that's one thing. And then the third thing is for them, and again, remember the reciprocity thing, for them to offer help. Okay, so I'm saying, okay, I'll connect you to this person. I'll try to get you an interview here or there. Then asking how they can help me. Maybe they can't, but just the offer is gracious and it'll resonate. And then of course you have to follow up. Okay, whether it's a thank you through email, whether it's a call, whatever it is, you want to follow up, and you want to get that sense that that the meeting made an impression, and that you're responsible, that you're going to take that information, whether it's introduction, whether it's another connection, you're going to take that and you're really going to maximize it. So just some things to keep in mind that a lot of people, a lot of Yale alums that I've been introduced to are totally ignorant of. It's amazing. If you just do some of the basics, you can really go a long way.
Alice?
And I think those are really good points. They are also kind of what your mother or father told you. Be nice, send thank you notes. Right. These are just common courtesies, I would say. And as we're getting to be a less and less courteous society, people who have a certain amount of power actually appreciate the fact that you are following up, that you are thinking a lot about what they're saying, you're listening to what they are saying. And I think the payback part of it, I think, is you have to be a little careful, because you don't want to appear to be doing a quid pro quo. Oh, thank you. So I'll try to get, your dog into the training institute, or your child into the college, or whatever. I mean, I think you have to be a little bit careful about what you're offering to be helpful on. But I think that given a little bit of time, you'll be able to figure out how you might be helpful. And I think also appreciation down the line. For example, what I found I remember best is when I've helped somebody and they thank me, which is very nice. And periodically they'll just drop a line and say, Alice, I've now gotten a promotion. I'm doing this. And just saying hi and thank you very much for your help those years ago. I just find that the next, anything I can do for that person, I will the next time around, because I realize that they're thinking about me too. So, and I've called upon those people at times over the years to help with other people. So my approach is, you need to pay forward whatever I've done for you, not to pay it to me, but pay it to the next generation, pay it to colleagues, pay it to those who are less fortunate. And I've found that it's a win-win, because it makes me feel terrific that I've influenced or helped somebody, and also that they have moved that forward. And maybe that's just me and my personality, but I really treasure that piece of mentoring. And I think that it also means that I really keep going out of my way to help. I think Ken's point of being succinct and saying what you want without being crass about it, but just being quite clear and recognizing that those of us who are giving the time, it is time, it's valuable time. So I've found that I remember giving a big speech to the all Yale Beijing Ivy first conference in 2014. And I said, please, if you're going to send me an email, put in the subject line that you met me at this conference, but please try to ask very specific questions, because I'm going to get thousands and thousands of emails every day from a variety of sources. And I want to pay attention, but it's going to be hard if it's very vague. And unfortunately, the first 3 emails I got were from people saying, oh, Ms. Young, it was so nice to meet you. Can we just have coffee and talk? And I just threw up my hands. Others followed instructions much more carefully, but that's.
Right. But it's interesting, because actually one of the things I'm hearing from you saying is it's very important to understand whether there's someone who wants to help. I mean, that's really what you're saying. That you also have to think and say you're in a large organization. You wanna find out, what are the people above you? Who are the people above you who genuinely do care about mentoring or helping people or have some history? Because if you pick the wrong person, a person who just doesn't doesn't consider it part of their job or responsibility, you could be spending a lot of time that's wasted, that in fact won't get anywhere. I mean, you might do something useful, but for example, I mean, they're just people who don't, they don't see that as part of the, of their personal goal or interest, right? So you have to seek people who do care about helping people, but also whether for selfish or unselfish reasons, right? They do it, right? Some people do it for selfish reasons. That's still okay if in fact you achieve your objective, right? By the way, some people, it's just, you gave the example of you helped someone and they kept in touch. And some people, it's just disingenuous, right? I remember there's one company, one startup of some students, not at Yale, by the way, but I was asked by someone at that who was their professor, say, could you help these folks? So I did, and they just had a totally wrong strategy. They were going after, a niche market when in fact there was a bigger market, but they were in a hurry. But if they took another 6 months and developed the product for the bigger market, they'd be successful. And on top of that, they thought they needed to raise an additional $10 million to build a plant to make the product. And I said to two of them, one is take the extra 6 months because the bigger market is worth it. But the other is, here are 5 people who will make the product for you. You don't have to make it yourself. You don't have to raise the $10 million. So they followed that. And every 6 months, I get an email from the young guy who's the CEO. And all he says is, we're great. We're doing great things. This is how great we are. And, he thinks he's staying in touch, And I don't want thank you notes, right? I'm not saying, oh, everything we're doing now was because you, but the message was the wrong message, right? You know, he could have done it in a different way and saying, I just wanted to say it because you were helpful. I want to stay in touch with you so you know how we're doing, right? But it was all a I'm great email. And it's exactly opposite. I bet you if I asked him, what do you think you're accomplishing? It's totally different from what he's actually accomplishing, right? Right.
But I think.
So can you be my mentor? I've decided he should, or you, right?
But one of the things that Ken mentioned, which I slightly disagree with, is that I think it's important to listen and make the other person feel that they're great. But I think that oftentimes those who are from a slightly different culture, be it Asian or whatever, tend to understate what their capabilities are. Oh, I'm not that good at this, but I'll give it a try. Women do the same thing. Even though they're probably perfectly capable of it, they might say, well, you know, I'll work on it. I'll try to do it, as opposed to, oh yeah, of course I can do this. So I think that you have to be careful that what you are, as the one that's asking for something, business or mentoring or whatever, there has to be enough of the element of, gee, I deserve your time and because I am good at these various things.
Sure.
If you don't say enough about it, which a lot of women and a lot of minorities tend to do, then they may take it at face value and really say, oh, well, you know, not to bother.
And just to go back on one of the things Peter said. So Bill Drayton, who's a Yale alum, law school alum, and he's the founder of Ashoka, which is the social entrepreneur incubator. He once said, or just not once, just last year at an alumni event, he said that the most important personality trait that you need to go forward in this century and beyond is cognitive empathy. You know, it's not analytical skills. It's not this or that. He said cognitive empathy. And what he really means by that is, obviously, to boil it down, it's people skills. He says those that do not have cognitive empathy, because they're entering a world that has so much interfacing, that has so much collaboration, that so much is involved with team building, it's really hard to go it alone. And if you don't have those skills, then, as you said, you're going to be banished from the sandbox.
Unless you're Steve Jobs.
Right.
You make your own sandbox.
Right, unless you have huge charisma on the other side. But for most of us, you know, so that notion of cognitive empathy, to not be tone deaf, to know what to say in an email and make sure that your follow-up email is just pitch perfect, that's such a huge skill. And if you can develop that, it's really worth the time involved.
Well, it's the phrase, what, EQ, right? As opposed to
right.
IQ.
Right.
Exactly.
And spell check, but read also. Some of the most ridiculous emails where they've worked very hard at writing this lovely email to me, and there is a spell check. It's spell checked, but it is so obviously not the right word that I go, what? And you realize I didn't proofread it. So I think it's also important in this day and age to just be careful what you write.
And beware of autocorrect. I once sent an email. I once sent an email and read back what you typed. I once put in the word internet, and Microsoft changed it to interest, right? So, and I caught it only because I reread the email and hit autocorrect. We have a question here from Michael Monsky, who obviously listened and said, okay, I'll mention my name. And the question was, what do you look for in the behavior of those who you believe might want to help? Okay. I think it's directed to you because he said, my apologies to Alice, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, I think probably you can usually tell by a short conversation. My personality tends to be that I like people. I'd like to find out about them. I'd like to be helpful. The minute that somebody mentions they're trying to do this or that, I try to think of like 4 or 5 different possibilities for them. It's just something I like to solve problems. So that's my personality, and I think people get it pretty quickly. And sometimes I have to be a little careful of turning the spigot off a little bit, because otherwise I would spend 24/7 just helping endlessly. But I think some people are a little bit more obtuse in terms of you can't really tell because they're quiet, or they're a little bit more to inward. But a lot of those people can be very, very helpful also. So I think it is a combination of an initial impression to see whether there seems to be some kind of a connection, but also doing, as Ken says, the homework. You look on Google, you check what their interests are and whatever, and then try that out on them. And if they seem to be interested and react to that, then you can probably go a little bit further and ask them, check with them, see if they might be more interested. But do a little bit of homework, because personalities are very, very different. So I'm sorry that that's not a very easy answer, but I think some you can tell right away that they probably would be helpful. Some are actually a little fakey in that they act like they would be really helpful, and then they don't return calls, they don't do anything, they just basically don't want to waste their time. So you have to be aware of that also.
Yes, true. I mean, Trish Takamoto, who was here in the room here, who together we've done every single one of these career panels and so forth. Remember, we once had someone who repeatedly said they wanted to help and volunteer, and every time we suggested that they show up so that we could work on it, she wouldn't show up, right, Trish, right? So that was definitely a fake interest, right? Fake interest, right?
I will say one thing. If you don't get a response from the person you're trying to network with immediately, send a ping a few days later, because a lot of times it happens to me, it gets caught in spam, it gets caught in your clutter file in Outlook. So give it a couple shots. There's a point where you have to maybe throw in the towel, but at least give it a couple shots, because it just could be a random error.
Another comment which people haven't talked about is that if part of your objective is, say, you want to get more investment banking business or whatever it is, you should think not only of how can I be in situations where I can meet people, but you should think, okay, for the decision makers who hire people or whatever, where do they convene, and can I have an expertise, right, where I get invited to be a speaker, right, at these events, right, or are there opportunities to write an article,
Sure,
right, in an industry periodical, whatever, that people read. So you should think about it not just in terms of meeting people and getting to know them. You should think in terms of where do decision makers for whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish, right, get influence. And if that's you get on a panel, right, of experts talking about solar energy or whatever it is, right, or there's an opportunity to write an article, right, and you actually have something useful to say. There you can hit a broad audience, right? If you're in solar energy, I'm just picking it as an example. If you get to write in Solar World and you write an article that's really thoughtful, that's going to be better than going to 15 conferences, right?
And that's, although the conference, the face-to-face, I found is really important. And so the combination of, if you are a good writer, yes, by all means, write articles. If you're not a great writer, don't agonize over writing articles. Give talks or go to conferences and meet people. I mean, I think you have to really figure out what your strengths are. You can practice, you can learn some of these skills, but also do things that come a little more naturally to you, because if you're always stretching and doing the hardest things, you get exhausted. And I found that when I was trying to build a business, I was starting out as a young lawyer and having to find clients, I was relentless. I went to 3 and 4 cocktail events or dinners every week. I wrote articles, I spoke at conferences, and in the end, what really worked was the referral network, in a sense, where people said, oh, you have that kind of a problem? You should talk to Alice. She helped me on such and such. That is the best kind of business to get if you're trying to get business, where you haven't been directly pushing for it, but someone says, that person is, Alice is the best at that. Go talk to her. Here's her email address or phone number or whatever. That's the best kind of referral. And that happens on boards. It happens, throughout in terms of your career. And that happens on not-for-profits too. How do I find funding for this organization that I care deeply about? Oftentimes it's, well, ask so-and-so, he's got a foundation, or ask his friend. Maybe he might not be interested, but he knows somebody who might. So it's that networking again, the art of networking.
But you have to start out, as you were saying, you have to start out
be good
also,
at what you do.
You have to have substance.
Yes.
If you don't have substance, it's sort of like marketing. You can advertise a product all day long, but if the product is not good, people won't buy it.
They will not come.
Right. So you have to start with saying, for what I want to do, how do I end up have high substance and high quality, right? Because people they won't refer you if they don't think you're good, right?
And also when you join things, you need to spend time on them. Just to join a lot of organizations and periodically show up at meetings, it's not going to get you very far in terms of networking. If you join because you have a real interest or passion, or it's part of your business, and then you really get to know the people, get involved in the committees and whatnot, I find that goes so much further than just the superficial. That's that.
Well, yeah, it's just like
cognitive empathy.
It's just like college applications. The college advisors, they say you don't want to put down you're in five clubs, 5 committees. Pick 1 or 2 that you're really focused on, and really excel in them. So same thing in life.
We have one last question here that we have time for, which will require some interpreting, which is, what do you recommend pre-graduation? Which I think they mean, what are the things you might do to advance this issue before you graduate? But I'll let you interpret that question.
I've got one, my
Okay.
interpretation of it. So if you're still at school, I would say take a lot of different courses. Okay, get out of your major. If you're in science, take humanities, and vice versa, because it's really those conversational touch points that will allow you to relate to a whole wide range of people. Okay, so I tell people all the time that a lot of my the biggest lesson I've learned is get out of your comfort zone and take things that are things that you might not normally take, because later in life, the payoff on that is huge.
I would say also, I agree. In addition, there's so many opportunities at Yale. For example,
Right.
I'm a fellow of Davenport College, and there are these, what used to be called master's teas. Now they're called, I think, college teas or whatever.
Heads of teas.
It sounds terrible. But where you have an opportunity to get to know some of the professors or outside people who have come in a variety of fields, and really talk to them, engage them, get a sense from them. They are also people that at some point in the future, if that's an area you're really interested in, can be terrific, possible help to you. Also, frankly, the wonderful thing about Yale is that you have an entire student body of people who got in because they were interesting in some way, smart and interesting. And those are people that throughout your life, you will be able to call upon. You've had the common experience. Get to know your classmates. They are a wonderful resource for you as you go into the workforce. And over the years, they will continue to be a group of people that you can call upon where they're not, they are naturally more likely to respond to you. So get to know your classmates and enjoy them, but also learn from them and keep in touch with them.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time, and I want to, first of all, thank our two panelists, I guess we call them, for this. I think your experiences have been very, very helpful in this fireside chat, and I hope this session was very helpful to those of you who are listening and watching. But also, if you are interested in legal profession, November 15th is a Yale career panel on the legal profession, and there seems to be not a question, it's just we got to thank you. So very good. All right, so thank you everyone, and I look forward to having some of you join the Yale career panel on legal profession. Thank you, Bill.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.